thanks for joining us. So we're really excited today to talk about what we're calling Procurement 3.0.
Yep.
And specifically, more about how both AI and orchestration are changing the way that people look at operating their procurement functions. With us today, we've just heard we have Chris Key, VP of Sourcing and Procurement at Northwestern Mutual. And before we get into the conversation, just want to set the stage very quickly about the challenge that procurement teams are facing today. So if we think about the last 5 years, enterprise procurement has fundamentally changed in a lot of ways. You've seen this in your own organizations, I'm sure, but more people are being involved in many types of purchases, everything from software to services to the amount of requests coming into the procurement organization. And more teams are involved in reviewing those kinds of requests, things like security, integrations, even risk assessments related to regulations. And in order to do all that, there are more tools and data involved in the entire procurement lifecycle. The challenge with that, though, is that many organizations find technology cannot fill that gap of rising expectations and rising workloads. If we look at research from Forrester we've conducted here, 99% of procurement leaders find with their current solution set that there is some form of challenge, whether that's they're too cumbersome to navigate, the workflows and the processes that they enable are too tedious, too linear, too rigid, and many of these tools are installed with other tools beside them or with other functions who have their own tools, and they do not talk to each other. They don't integrate. Alongside that, many procurement organizations, whether it's due to this increased workload, external macro pressures like we heard in the last presentation, are being forced to change from a more tactical, reactive function to one that is much more strategic. In fact, many organizational leaders are being asked to lead on the charge of digital transformation when it's related to AI. They're being asked to increase operational resilience, very relevant in a more unstable, volatile world, and then manage overall operational risk. So the role of procurement here has fundamentally changed to a different era. And this is what we call the orchestration era, Procurement 3.0. One where AI-powered workflows integrate across every system in the organization. So procurement orchestration has become a defining not only tool or technology, but also approach to how people are addressing many of these challenges. Zip itself is a leader in the space. We are a 500 customer organization, about 5 years old, that has been doing procurement orchestration since our inception, actually. And one of those organizations that has been so early and leading the charge on procurement orchestration has been Northwestern Mutual, which is why I'm very excited to go here today. If you don't know Northwestern Mutual, large, very well-established Fortune 500 financial services firm just up the shore in Milwaukee, if you are familiar with Lake Michigan here. And we are very excited to have Chris here today to talk about how he is tackling some of these issues. So Chris, first and foremost, just want to ask, tell us about your role, your organization, and how you've come into the world of orchestration.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me speak at this conference. Actually, my first time at Procurement Supply Chain Live, so pleasure to be here, but I'm also looking forward to learning from everyone and getting a chance to network with as many of you as possible. So I've been in the procurement, supply chain, finance space for a little over 20 years. Worked for companies like IBM, Kimberly-Clark, Healthcare Service Corporation here in Chicago, also known as Blue Cross Blue Shield. In the past 5 years, I've been with Northwestern Mutual, as you mentioned, up in Milwaukee. And Northwestern Mutual is a non-investor-owned mutual organization. It's been around for over 167 years. But really, two companies merged into one organization. So we are an insurance company. We also are a wealth management financial services company, merged into one. So from a procurement landscape, you can imagine lots of risk, lots of regulatory concerns, things that we need to do as a part of our normal procurement due diligence process. Other than that, though, I'm actually based here in Chicago. I've lived here for about 18 years. Live up in Wrigleyville with my wife and 3 kids. Happy to be here.
Great. And so in your role, we've seen this actually play out quite well. Many organizations are being asked to do more with less. They're being asked to act in more strategic functions. You yourself have talked a lot about addressing risk and even revenue aspects. Across your career and then with your own organization at Northwestern Mutual, how have you seen the role of procurement evolve?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So it's funny because this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, I was at my house and I was going through my old storage unit inside my garage, and I found these like boxes of stuff I've carried with me from a few of my different jobs, right? And I started opening up these boxes, lots of like trinkets and supplier stuff that I've like accumulated over time. But then I came across like these different colored 3-ring like big binders. And I started opening these binders, I'm looking through them, and they're essentially our training guides from procurement. And again, like I started in procurement over 20 years ago, have done this at a few different companies, so I had 2 different decks I was looking at. Open up the first one, Company A, and it's a Chevron-based process. I'm sure many people in this room have decks back at home somewhere that have a Chevron-based process around procurement. This particular one had 5 steps. I opened up the second one, that one had 7 steps. It brought it 3 years apart. And so I think to me, it kind of illustrated how we thought about procurement previously, right? And like not that long ago, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you think about it. So we really thought about procurement as a process. Like how do we bring structure to something that is like doesn't have a lot of order, and that's like that was the buying process or the procurement process. And I think we dictated our value based on how many steps we had in our process and how many chevrons we were actually managing to. I think the second landing spot in the value narrative for procurement, probably 5 years later, was like, okay, now we have a process. We have a bunch of chevrons. Everyone's managing through all the bullets underneath those things. How well do we know that? And like how quickly are we able to get through that process? I think fast forward to now, where we're at, and I think a lot of it is predicated based on the evolution of technology. It's being even more accelerated through AI and other things that companies like Zip are doing, is we're fundamentally shifting our value narrative from a group that owns a process to a group that is truly the collector and aggregator of data points across our supply base. On top of it too, I think our supplier lifecycle has evolved beyond where it was. So before it was like, we really only care about what happens pre-contract. Once we get to contract, we kind of wipe our hands and we move on. The supplier lifecycle is now a 360 closed loop, right? And it goes far beyond what happens after we sign the contract. So when I think about our role and how we've evolved, it really is like that mental shift and that significant shift from being a process owner and being a steward of that process to now being subject matter experts of everything from a data and analytics standpoint around what's going on with third parties within our organization.
And it's fascinating that you mentioned those Chevron-based processes. If we think of this in the paradigm of procurement 1, 2, and 3, really we hear this a lot from organizations that the way that processes used to work, in a way, was influenced a lot by how the tools themselves were designed to fit those processes. I'm curious from your perspective, we heard from earlier research that manual processes, very linear and rigid ones, were barriers to transformation. In your organization, how did that challenge you, that old approach, and then how did orchestration help solve for or help you reimagine what could be done with your process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think procurement tools of the past is they were very linear. I mean, to your point, they were also developed through acquisition, right? So like, I think at that point in time, where technology was, it was all about how do you fit everything in one single platform, whether you needed it or not, whether or not it was designed for your particular use case or fit for your purpose or not. And I've helped implement many tools in my time: Coupa, Ariba, Workday, Bravo. I mean, you name it. And I mean, to me, I mean, there was a lot of limitations in doing that, particularly someone who is running and leading procurement organizations in a services industry, right? I think it's different when you're in manufacturing and you really need some of that deep, like line level expertise, and you're managing through materials and direct procurement and things like that. But from a services, specifically indirect space, those tools are not built for what we need from our, based on our use case. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning too, my world continues to change almost every month, every quarter, definitely every year. Also, once we get new presidential administrations in, my world changes, and because regulations change and other things change around like how we need to operate. So my procurement process needs to have flexibility and agility built into it. I think a lot of the old mindset was like, those monolithic tools, number one, like you would just have to adopt it, and like that was your process, and there was not a lot of flexibility, and if you wanted to customize it, it was expensive. So we needed to find ways to be flexible, first and foremost. And then the second thing is, again, like these things were built by acquisition, so you were taking on tools and paying for them really, and whether or not you needed them or were ready for them or not. I think one of the things that we found as a benefit from going through orchestration is it kind of changed that paradigm and untethered us, if you will, from like that monolithic, like have to buy it all through one platform type approach. We were able to build some flexibility and nimbleness through our orchestration tool, which now houses our process, which we change like on a monthly basis. And Nick and the Zip team that supports us can attest to that. We're constantly changing things around within our process, but like that is the nucleus of which we make all of our decisions. And I think again, like the acceleration of technology, the low code, no code APIs that we have through Zip has allowed us to now then build in different technologies and vertically integrate them, but we do it at our own pace. So there's places where we're making decisions on, do we need a technology, do we not need a technology? If we do need a technology, how far or how robust of a tool do we want to go acquire and then bolt into Zip or not? Or do we need something that's really just light touch to get us through the next 3 years of regulatory concerns or whatever it might be? So I think it's really two things that we've seen is like, number one, it's helped us to change that paradigm and build more flexibility and nimbleness into our process, which we are constantly redesigning. And then secondly, it allowed us that ability to do vertical integration of adapting other tools that are developing, test them out, bolt them into our process, and then have something that's a little bit more fit for purpose for us and a little bit more best of breed.
You make a great point here about you're able to have optionality and flexibility in how you run your organization from a process and a technological perspective. What we're also finding is that it also affects the people part of this. And I'm curious, as you've adapted your organization to more of an orchestration-based mindset, how have you changed or reinvented your operating model? How has orchestration changed the way your team operates and interacts with your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it's helped us in a couple of ways. The first way that orchestration really has helped us is it allowed us to see demand in a completely different landscape. So before, I think we had a good understanding of how many dollars we're spending, how many contracts are coming to us, et cetera. But there's so much other work outside of like core procurement stuff. So like outside of RFIs, RFPs, contracts, there's like a whole host of other things that we were being asked to do as a procurement organization. We just didn't have a really strong front door to be able to capture that and understand like what are we really working on. I think once we had a better profile of that, which now everything in my company starts and ends with Zip, we implemented P2P as well at the end of last year, replacing one of those monolithic programs or tools that I mentioned before. And again, like everything starts and ends with Zip at our company. So we have full lifecycle view of everything that comes in, and we're able to dissect and analyze and then figure out like what is our true makeup of our work. We've stratified that in what we call our working pyramid, right, between strategic, operational, and tactical work. And learning how much like tactical work we are responsible for being asked to do through like some of the data and inputs we have from Zip has allowed us to like rethink our operating model. So as we are thinking about 25 and 26, our operating model design, which is very much is built on categories and category support, doing everything soup to nuts within a category. We're taking out some of that tactical work and some of that low risk operational work and putting it into a shared service where like anything that comes through Zip is attributed, and if it meets those attributions, it'll go straight to the shared services team and they'll execute. And I think it's helped us to create capacity for our category managers. It's allowed us to do more strategic work in that pyramid and kind of like re-engineer the type of work that we need our category managers and leaders to do, which has been super helpful and allowed us to have a broader reach out to the organization. But if I take a step back on operating model and like what has happened since we've implemented new technology and taken this approach, our job roles have changed. Like the skills that I need in my organization to be successful have shifted completely. It's great if you have like 15, 20 years of being a practitioner, but the reality is like the procurement roles of the future are those that like know procurement, but are also agile enough and have those skills to be flexible enough to bend with the way that the procurement industry is moving. And a lot of this is going to be based on technology and the adoption of AI. So I think like number one, making sure we have the right skills in our organization, making sure we have the right people in those, that are managing through those skills and making sure that those people are in the right places in order for us to be successful.
And Since you mentioned it, I'd love to double click on this AI topic a bit more. We've been very inspired to watch companies like yours, OpenAI, Anthropic, all who work with Zip, talk about how they're using AI to change really not only how their teams work, but also how they relate with stakeholders, as you just mentioned. I wonder if you could share a little bit about how your team is looking at and using AI today and your vision for your future. What kind of tools you're using, or really what use cases are most ripe for experimentation in your group?
Yeah, so our AI journey, I'm sure, is very similar to lots of folks in this room. It's been very slow, right? And I think we've taken a very cautious approach. I think in the inception of AI, we evaluated a bunch of different things. We looked at this as kind of a, do we want to build this? Do we want to buy it? Are we taking a centralized approach? Are we taking a federated approach? So I think both through, in our own little procurement finance silo, and then also working with our AI council, which I also sit on to vet different AI use cases that go through our organization, as well as with some of our technology leaders. We've taken the approach of saying, hey, we're going to separate ourselves from the centralized strategy and allow procurement to take a federated view of what's going on in AI. I'll say this, we're using AI in some of our travel and expense spaces. We're using it in our AP space. We're starting to use it in within our orchestration and P2P and contracting space. But we really, want to make sure that we're heavily investing and taking a careful and cautious approach to our use of AI across those use cases and ones that are coming in the future. The other thing too is, we talked about operating model and how we want to really put a lot of our transactional operational work into a shared services organization, which is a dedicated team just to do that in a consistent, efficient way. All of our use cases, we put them up on our heat map. All of the use cases we're targeting are going to be how do we take resources out of that work to get that done more efficiently, really look at AI, but more than that, trust our partners that are developing this stuff for us and letting us leverage their investments, and then testing them. I think another way that we're looking at AI too is from a procurement perspective, we're doing research all the time for business owners across the organization. We want to also use ourselves as an internal customer, right? So we're doing RFIs for procurement to test AI to see what else is out there and make sure that we have a firm grip on the landscape of where these things are evolving. Again, applying it to our heat map and figuring out what is out there so we can plan for the future.
And you're doing a lot of that research. It's putting you in this very strategic advisory role. I'm curious from that research, though, what are the challenges you've encountered? I know there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of potential here, but where have things not panned out as much?
Yeah, I think AI there's just so many dependencies on being able to turn it on within any organization. I think there's very few organizations that say, hey, turn it on, implement it, have at it, and good luck. Our due diligence that we need to go through internally, those hoops are pretty, there's a lot of them and they're very narrow and some of them are on fire. And so we are slowly getting through some of those hurdles and hoops to make sure that, number one, like I said, we have a lot of regulatory risk, a lot of things that we need to answer to and attest to in terms of how we're using AI, back to regulators, both federally and locally. And so threading that needle of what we're able to do versus what we'd like to do has been a little bit of a challenge for us. And I would say we don't have a good answer yet. We're still moving through that process as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and being in this role too, you're not only looking at it from a viability perspective, but also, it's procurement. You're looking at the business case as well. Can you talk a little bit about both from your perspective for building a business case for your own use, but then also when you're evaluating business cases for other functions, what are you looking at, and what does a good business case look like?
Yeah, there's probably three dimensions that we really are building our business cases around. The first is, what is the impact going to be to the organization? So can we truly, do we have a good way to talk about the full value of what is going to be brought by AI? I think it's easy for us to look internally at just procurement and say, I'm going to be able to reduce our cycle times by X, but I need to be able to translate that into business impact so that I can gain support from an enterprise perspective. Going back to the challenges, it's also me bringing different use cases to this AI council, again, which I sit on and have to approve. But there's all of my peers are bringing different AI cases back to this council as well. So we're kind of competing for bandwidth, if you will, for engineering resources, time, budget, prioritization, for us to get these things through. So I need to have a really strong value proposition that is going to not just impact and benefit procurement, but also benefit the enterprise. So I need to be able to translate that very clearly. I think the second piece is we need to have a really firm understanding of cost, and not just the cost of a license or cost of a transaction, but the holistic multi-year cost and impact to our budget. A lot of that is not just what are we paying in order to get AI in here, but what do we think that this is going to reduce for us over time? And so part of it has been staffing, and I'll be honest with that. But a lot of it has been just gaining efficiency and being able to quantify what would additional capacity for our category managers actually drive, how does that drive value? Does it give us more time to go out and save money for the organization, to do proactive things, and being able to translate that in a way that can be quantitative, but also make sense to leaders across my organization that are not super familiar with procurement. And then the third thing I would say is just really understanding the time horizon, right? And being real with it. I think the time horizon of implementing AI is not short, it's not easy. And so we've had to adopt that. And I think when we built our 25 priorities and roadmap in call it Q3 of 24, I thought it'd be a lot faster for us to implement some of our AI, some of the AI use cases that we were evaluating, and we've come to find it's gonna take us a lot longer. So needing to adjust to that has been the third piece of the business case we've had to adjust to.
Yeah, and that adjustment gives you time to think about some of these questions. One you mentioned is this shift from tactical work to strategic work, and a lot of people say this, they talk about it a lot. But from your perspective, as you've had time to build that roadmap and evaluate what can work, what do you think this really looks like in practice to shift to more strategic work? And how do you imagine that your own team will be spending its time in a year or 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, it is my hope, and it's definitely our strategic approach right now. But I kind of mentioned number one, the combination of technology and operating model redesign is all focused at creating more capacity for our category managers to do more strategic work. And it's not just to do more of the work that they're currently doing. We've rebuilt our job descriptions, and we've added on a good amount of additional accountabilities that we want them to go out and do. A lot of those are anchored in how well are we partnering with the business, how well are we creating goals for our procurement folks and our category managers that line up and nest into the goals of our business leaders and the multi-year imperatives of our company, as well as proactively how we're going to go out and generate savings. So for 26, one of the things we're doing is we're adding a goal. Right now we have a goal of how much are we saving based on spend under management, et cetera. But next year we're actually going to have a goal that says how much proactive savings generation and number of ideas that accumulate into that savings generation do we want our category managers to produce. A lot of that comes to data that we have through, like I said, our orchestration tool and understanding demand. Part of it is us talking to the business owners and understanding where are their opportunities and things that they want to go after. But using all that information and data, we're building new goals into the roles of our category managers, and we're expanding that. And like I said, this is not the job that a lot of folks in my team signed up for 10, 15, 20 years ago. It is a much different role that we're expecting them to do, and a lot of it was predicated on us looking at technology, redesigning our operating model, and then creating new expectations of the value that we want to add, what we would be known for at the company.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating shift, right? Because in this context of procurement 3.0 compared with how things were done 10, 20 years ago, you look at all the research these days, Hackett has projected that with the rise of orchestration as a technology, the operating model shifts too, exactly to what you said. People spend much more time in the business with stakeholders or even embedded within business functions. It involves a lot of reskilling, and that's actually where I'd love to end on questions with you, is just we're looking at orchestration as a new way of operating. We're looking at AI as a new tool to enable that. It can be very overwhelming for people to know where to start. So from your perspective, you've done a lot of research on this. How do you make sure that your people are ready for this AI and orchestration first future? And how do you educate yourself? Any resources you'd recommend?
Yeah, so you mentioned Hackett. Actually, we spent a lot of time with Hackett and another consulting company as well that we work closely with to evaluate skill sets of the future for procurement. And again, it really aligns to this concept of practitioner, knowing the process, whether that be 5 chevrons or 20 chevrons, it doesn't matter, but like, you know, how well are people able to adapt to technology? How well are they able to adapt to you know, changing business conditions? And then also like, what are those like EQ dimensional skills that we need for our practitioners moving forward, or our category managers? And again, like, it's not about how well they are managing a tactical process and moving from step to step. It really is about how well do they influence, how well can they partner, how well can they work in a matrixed organization. So I think it is really a pretty significant shift, I think, from the types of skills that we were looking at in the past. So to get to your question of like how we've looked at this and actions that we've taken, we've remapped our job skills and redesigned and rewrote basically all of our job descriptions, which we'll start to deploy next year. We are looking at trainings. We're looking at other ways to develop and upskill our current folks and make sure that we have them in the right places in order for them to be successful. And then again, continuing to look at the work and then trying to be transparent to business stakeholders, business leaders, like my boss, the CFO as well, in terms of like, you know, what does the demand profile look like? How do we think this is going to change for us in 26 and 27, so that we can have a more data-driven strategic way to say, like, this is how we need to build, this is how we need to invest, and this is why procurement's going to be able to drive more value in the coming years.
And I think the results speak for themselves, because the way that you've looked at measuring improvement is exactly a lot of what you've been discussing. You know, we noticed a 20% increase in spend under management with your new approach, but you're talking about evolving that even further to how you're influencing demand, or you're seeing the benefits in a more transparent process that brings that demand, that stakeholder closer to you. So really, it's about not only a change in approach, but also a change in the way you're measuring success, which I think is very, frankly, progressive, especially that's why we call it, you know, a different era of procurement. Before we end, I wanted to open the floor here. Does anyone have any questions for Chris on this approach? You got one in the back at least.
Well, this is where I come into my own again. I have to run to the back of the room.
Hi there, thanks for the discussion. I'm Dean Antonot with Capgemini. I was intrigued by what you were saying, and to provoke you a little bit, I noticed a little bit of underlying, I would say, ambition there that you can't fully express. I heard you talking about slow and cautious, and I heard you say things I'd like to do. So if you take off the guardrails for a second, let's assume we can address those. What is it that you'd really love to do, but you can't yet for whatever reason?
I think it's probably, if I'd answer it the right way, I think, or the way I want to answer it, to me, it's probably less about where we're headed. It's more about the time horizon in which we're going to have to use in order to get there. Like, I would love to make these changes right away, but people, process, technology just takes time. And in a big company, it takes due diligence and other things that we need to go through. But so to me, like, the destination wouldn't change necessarily, but I would just love to get there faster. And for us, like, I've been with the company for 5 years. We had a 5-year strategic roadmap. We're in year 4 of that roadmap. And I really want to stick to the plan that we've been on. I think we're able to do it. It's going to take a lot of convincing, a lot of due diligence, and a lot of like effort for us to get everything done in next year. The reality is it's probably going to take us out a year beyond where we originally targeted, but we're still feeling pretty good about the change.
And this is why I love questions from the room, because they are always, always better than mine. We are right up on time, I'm afraid. So a warm thank you and round of applause for Nick and for Chris, please.
Thanks. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.